let's jump in. Rotating assembly. What is a crankshaft, Charles?
A crankshaft in, I probably shouldn't go to the 305 terminology real quick, but crankshaft is what turns, essentially, you have chemical energy and it turns it into potential chemical energy into mechanical energy. That's how you get the spinny thing.
The spinny thing. Right. So we've got that thing attached to it, which is part of a rod and a piston. Also from a 991.1 GT3, and it's actually used. You can see it's got black stuff on top. We'll talk about what that is sometime later.
This is your finger follower engine.
Yes.
Not from a failed engine, just one we took apart because we were bored.
We like to take things apart because we like to know things, and you don't often get to know things unless you're willing to take them apart. Luckily, Charles can both take them apart and put them back together. Key part of that second part, otherwise it costs a lot of money. You take them apart and then they're fucking broken. You can't do anything with them. Well, that was dumb. So show the people where that part fits on this part.
So on the crankshaft here, there's the journals. Oh, I guess there's one right here.
Yep, journals are where the bearings land.
Yeah, that's where
we'll jump around a little bit.
Piston rod here, and it, I guess, for turn it, moves up and down.
He's going to zoom in here for a second.
Yep, there
we go.
Hey.
There we go.
This is pretty basic. This is the same in about everything. Piston rod down here on the journal. And when the crankshaft spins around and piston goes up and down, and
side, spin up.
Yeah, so this goes down and then it spins and then it goes up. Yep. So pretty basic. Pretty much the same, and I'll say pretty much the same in most engines. There's a few oddball ones out there.
Rotaries don't count.
Variable compression engines are different.
Yeah. That's a relatively new thing.
Go into that.
Yeah, that's. Thank you for bringing that up. Holy crap, that's another giant rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So we've got the crankshaft, and the crankshaft spins, and it sits in the engine block, and it rides on bearings, and those bearings have oil, and a bearing in one of these engines is not like the bearing on your skateboard. They're similar. That's a ball bearing. So an engine bearing is just a thin sheet of malleable metal that is made in such a way to receive an oil film and keep that film on the bearing. And we're kind of jumping around, but it's important because we're kind of there. So that's a crankshaft. It is the thing that takes the bang in the cylinder that pushes the piston down and it rotates the crankshaft.
Same process as your bicycle.
Yep.
Crankshaft, pedal.
Yep.
You're essentially crankshaft and the pedals would be considered crankshaft, rod, piston, and then you are pushing down the piston to create rotational energy.
Yep.
Rotational energy to
also a chemical process.
There you go.
There you go. All right.
Yeah.
So a rod is this part, or
here's a different one. All you Metzger guys out there.
Yep.
Here's your Metzger $7 billion, not really.
Yeah.
Pankel titanium rod.
Unobtainium rod. Yeah. So that's from a Metzger engine. For those of you who don't know what a Metzger engine is, that is a 996, 997 GT3, which has its roots far, far, far earlier than that, including the 962, which is...
Actually, it goes all the way back?
Yeah, it goes back farther than that, right?
All the way to day one. Technically, I could trace it all the way back to the original Volkswagen Beetle engine, but... Interesting. Not today. I don't have time for that.
He was a smart dude. He was a smart dude. So... That's a rod. Rod connects the piston to the crankshaft. Rods are important. Anybody who has, quote, bent a rod in the past in your turbo Subaru or your turbocharged 2JZ or whatever you did, and you just cranked up the boost and you bent a rod.
Or chucked it up the block.
Or chucked it out the block. This is what you bent. This thing went and didn't like getting compressed. I probably did that off screen, but close enough. Yeah. Piston for this engine is very interesting. Thank you. That's helpful. A bent valve.
Yes.
So we'll get to that. So this piston is probably a little different than what you guys have imagined previously. It looks like some of it's missing. Because typically you see a piston and this skirt part goes all the way around. So why don't you expound for a minute why Porsche chose not to have the skirt go all the way around the piston?
So the typical piston, which we have another one here in the building.
I think we got, you got your giant one, don't you? Because that's from a giant fucking dragster engine, which is awesome.
Yeah. So this is.
Oh, that's nice. That one's got a lot of compression area on the top.
So, well,
good counterpoint. It's also fucking gigantic.
It's big. So we have two.
That's a fancy piston. It's got
this is a
ports and fire
all
shit,
stuff,
all the good
gas
stuff.
Ports
Yeah, gas
everything.
ports and shit.
So two types. This is a fully forged, I'm going to assume, a 2618 piston. Actually, they both are 2618s.
There you go. 2618 means?
That is the alloy grade of aluminium.
Aluminium?
Aluminium.
How did we get away with an aluminium piston in a really hot engine? How does it not melt?
You know, we all cross our fingers.
Indeed. Indeed.
This piston design, the reason this one has a lot more mass and meat in it is this is supposed to make, you know,
like
10,000 horsepower, give or take, if we could measure that. And this needs to be cost effective, strong, and lightweight at the same point. They call this a box forging because you can see it's kind of got a box shape on it. Most production performance pistons are going to be this way. Yep. They're actually pretty nice pistons. The design Porsche did on these is actually really pretty cool.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different aspects I could go on for a few days, but we got a wrist pin inside here. They call it a Grudgian pin. Technically, this is what the pin sits in here, and the rod.
Yeah, the pin is a hollow tube, if you will, that holds the rod to the piston.
Yep. There you go.
It's called a pin because at one point it was probably small and not hollow.
Yeah.
And that matured over time.
Yeah. So there's piston rings are still on this because this engine just got torn apart because we were bored.
Yep.
So I just say it that way.
Talk to them about the rings that are on there and why there are rings on a piston.
So we have a main compression ring at the top here. This is the main one that tries to seal in the cylinder to keep combustion gases from going past the piston because you want to retain all the pressure above this so you can have the pressure to move the piston downward.
Yep.
The middle ring there's a few different terms for this. Secondary compression ring is generally the term. This ring helps control excess oil that gets stuck on the cylinder wall here. This ring is the one generally that when it wears out, the engine starts smoking like crazy because it can't remove all the extra oil off the cylinder wall.
Okay.
I could talk about this ring for an hour. We'll save this for another day.
Yep.
Some bits.
That's an important component, especially in the naturally aspirated engines that we're playing with.
Yes. The bottom ring is the final oil control ring. Scrapes the first line of oil off, and there's actually holes in here. You can see right there, there's that little hole.
Yep, yep.
Scrapes oil inside the piston. There's little holes, you can see it in there. And some of these actually have, I don't see it in this one. Let's see if I can find it. They will have oil holes that actually divert oil to the wrist pin. To actually lubricate the wrist pin.
To lubricate the wrist pin as it's scraping the cylinder wall and getting the oil off of it. Okay.
So that design is controversial. Some companies don't like doing that because it can make the piston weaker.
Yep.
So they'll have a little pinhole right here in the top of the rod for splash lubrication, or for if you have piston oil squirters, jet squirters in the case, it'll squirt oil up under the piston.
And these do have that.
Yeah, these have that.
Yeah, so
and these have two of these holes.
Porsche engines will generally have oil squirters to try and keep the pistons cooled off. We'll come back to that. That's kind of a 201 level discussion about how keeping the surface of the piston at a constant, even temperature is important. Otherwise,
more constant, more even.
More constant, more even. Indeed, because it's never going to be constant nor even. But we can try, and with that, things like flame front and pre-ignition and being able to run closer to MBT ignition mean best torque ignition. We'll come back to some of these acronyms and such later. But for you guys to hear them and begin to absorb them, it's kind of like Duolingo. You have to hear it once in a while. It's like speaking a new language. Once you hear it a couple times and you kind of start, you can go to Cars and Coffee and sound like you know what the fuck you're talking about.
Somebody does.
Until somebody that knows more than you calls you out on your shit and you figure out you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. That was me talking to Charles the first time. I thought I knew what I was talking about, and he's like, what the fuck?
Something else that's fun on this dragster piston that they have, and I actually love doing these, is in the top here. There's all these little, tiny little holes here. They're called lateral gas ports, and those that have more interest can ask more questions later, and we'll do another
lateral gas port.
These, when the piston ring is here on the edge of the piston and the ring land to the cylinder, the pressure doesn't just stay on the top of the piston. It'll go to every gap crevice it tries to, as it spreads across the piston, and the flame propagates and the pressure spreads. It will eventually get all the way into the side gap here, hit the piston ring, and these little holes in here allow the pressure to get behind the main compression ring,
push it out,
and helps push it out into the cylinder to get better seal.
Deflect it. Yeah, it allows it to get behind the ring and push it into the cylinder so you don't end up losing compression as you continue to crank up boost or cylinder pressure.
Motorcycles and some other engines will have vertical gas ports in the top, which allows a quicker response for the pressure to get behind the ring. However,
like MotoGP stuff?
Yeah, they will carbon up really quick. So
all right, so you kind of got to tear it down and fix them. Or,
yeah, you couldn't run with this much carbon on the piston; they would just plug up.
So you got to run super fancy fuels and find other ways to keep the cylinder wall lubricated. Sure. Yeah. All right.
So, and this piston has a lot of oil holes in behind the main oil return ring. So this is
and what's crazy is this is a piston and this is an engine that gets torn apart every run. It gets to run for 8 seconds and then it comes back and gets torn apart and rebuilt.
This one, I don't know if you can zoom in inside here. This has the little oil holes into the piston ring, or the piston pin here.
Oh yeah, check that out.
Those come from the behind the ring land to get extra oil.
Yep.
Now you also have to think this piston's, the cylinder pressure on this is probably
fucking A.
I don't know, 200,000 pounds of force. So you're pushing on the oil film.
Let's talk about that for a second. So there's some definitions here. So people understand what horsepower is, and people understand that when you have a bang that goes off in a cylinder and it pushes down on a piston, that it's an increase in pressure that is pushing the piston down. In essence, horsepower and cylinder pressure are 1-to-1 related to each other. They're in essence a measurement of the same thing. One is the pressure that's pushing down on the piston. The other is how much rotation we're getting out of the crankshaft. It's the cumulative sum of all the cylinder pressures happening over and over and over again. Crankshafts that are really lightweight, that spin really cool and rah, 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 oh, it's so cool, I love it. Don't do it. That's a really quick way to get an engine rebuild in the next probably 10,000 miles. So counterweight is important. It's one of the things that can be designed to keep resonance at bay.
There's a reason they call these counterweights.
Correct.
Or counterbalance.
Yes.
And when you remove the counterbalance, you no longer have balance. And a lot of this, the thickness, the diameter, these ones are actually cut narrower.
Yep.
They're pretty thin here. If you look at an older crankshaft, say
big and blocky.
A 2000, a specific example in the Porsche world, a 2001 GT3 RS, the race car, these counterweights are a full wedge shape, and they are out.
What did that engine rev to, Charles?
Those actually didn't even rev that high, 84, 8500, I think.
Okay.
However, they had a lot of mass in the crank, and they had really good counterbalance. Engine had a factory harmonic damper on it.
Right.
Harmonic damper specifically.
Yep, yep. Not dampener.
Not damper. That's different.
Yes.
In the later engines, 2004 and on, they actually started taking half of these counterweights and they started whittling them down like this to take weight off the crankshaft, because at higher RPM, they didn't need the additional counterbalance. At higher RPM, say 4,000 to 8,000.
Which is where that engine lived.
Correct. They didn't require the extra meat. Eventually, as you can see in this engine, they kept cutting the counterweight down more and more. Now these are thicker and the rod bearings are thinner, and that's something else for another discussion.
There's emissions components, there's fuel mileage components, there's a number of things that are happening, frictional components that are going on with all of that aren't necessarily performance oriented. This is something else I want you all to understand. Y'all are driving street cars. You don't own a race car. your street car needs to operate at 500 RPMs, 1,000 RPMs, 2,000 RPMs, as well as 9,000 RPMs, and it is built to a cost specification. You do not own a 919 Evo race car that does the Nürburgring in 5 minutes. So because these are street cars, there are going to be compromises for them being street cars, and for Porsche having to, one, make money first, second, pass regulations, third, make more money, and fourth, make more money. So all of the things we're seeing here are very, very well done given those constraints. Would we do it the same? Probably not. We'd probably come up with something that's pretty damn close, because copying the guy's homework over their shoulder when they did most of it right isn't wrong.
Something a lot of people don't understand when they say, hey, why didn't Porsche build this way? Why didn't they make more power in this car? Why is this car so slow? They know how to. $1 billion company that is at the tops of racing, they know what they're doing. They know more than we do.
100%.
The difference is they're trying to make a product that's desirable and make sure that the next product is desirable. This GT3 has 415 horsepower. Oh, it's awesome, it's great. Oh, the next one's got 435. The next one's got 450.
Right.
The next one's 475. You got to make it so that you want to get rid of what you have. You want to buy the next thing. If you don't want to buy the next product,
then Porsche did it wrong.
You're just going to go out of business.